we live in a really dynamic atmosphere today. Certainly on the prevention side, we're very focused on bringing in the programmatic approach to colorectal cancer screening in general. So there's no question about that. But as we start entering the world of precision medicines, then we're starting to get into the broader field of cancer, not just colon cancer per se. And as we see these new precision medicines and immunotherapies coming, to use around the world, we recognize the lack of ability to screen for those particular people that might have these certain mutations that these precision medicines can target specifically. And that started some work, for example, that we prioritized in terms of molecular profiling. So I entered the steering committee. I became part of the steering committee for the Beat Cancer Coalition and worked globally on an international basis with something called FT3 on the board of FT3 from testing to targeted treatments, so that we can not only get the Canadian perspective, but a global and international perspective of what's going on in different countries and how we can learn from other countries or adopt some of those strategies in order to have equitable access in the country. And then we worked with some of our pharma partners and other partners. So we worked together in a program with Pfizer and Thermo Fisher in order to see, can we get molecular profiling done in the community and non-academic centers, and started to understand the issues that go along and really how problematic that is actually. And whereas at the beginning we were screaming everybody has to have equitable access to profiling, and we still firmly believe in that, we now recognize the challenges involved in getting that done. So in the prevention side, that's pretty clear. But as we start dealing with precision medicines, we started to look deeper. And as we looked deeper, what we found was that a lot of these precision medicines that were coming down were not going to be approved, and Canadians were not going to get access to them. So we took a look at that and we deconstructed the situation. We said, okay, why are these products not going to be accepted? And by and large, they more easily made it through the regulatory side, but on the health technology assessment side for reimbursement, it became problematic because a lot of these products, we weren't going to see phase 3 trials for an extended period of time. It could be 20 years before they would have enough people participating in a trial that we could see this. So we had to try to reimagine, okay, well, what is the problem, and take it apart. And we started to work with our researchers and understand that we need a different type of trials, basket trials, for example, that in order to find these patients all over the world. A good example was in larotrectinib, which is an NTRK fusion drug that's not specific to any one particular cancer, but multiple cancers. And there's never going to be a phase 3 trial on that for maybe 20 years if we're lucky. And how would that get through HTA? Because we knew, having spoken to patients, not just in colorectal, but in other areas, disease sites, that this was having a huge impact. So when it worked, it really, really worked for these people and took it from almost certain death to fully functionable and almost cured a situation. So we, as I said, we deconstructed and we said, what has to be done? So we worked with the Canadian Personalized Healthcare Innovation Network, or I worked with them more appropriately on their board, and understood that maybe there is a way to develop a conditional approval process. And we tried to bring Health Canada and CADITH on board. And then through Roche and CFIN, they worked with BC Cancer in developing a program called PREDICT in order to try to look at ways that they could gather that type of evidence, real-world evidence, so that they could give early acceptance to products in situations such as the archetype of a larotrectinib, where there would only be phase 2 data at most. So that kind of sort of opened the doors. And then at Exactis Innovation, on the board there, we started to see personalized my treatment, again, more molecular profiling being done to identify patients who either could get on a clinical trial for their treatment or who could be matched with a specific treatment. And again, that fit really well into the fold of better understanding precision medicines and how patients could access them. And as we started to see that, we said, well, how are patients going to get access to this? They're not getting them approved so quickly. Let's look at clinical trials. And that became a priority. So from molecular profiling and precision medicines, we said, well, we better understand better how patients could get into clinical trials. What about clinical trial navigation? Who's navigating on behalf of patients? How do we encourage industry to invest more in research in Canada? And we formed an advocacy group among researchers, the Canadian Health Research Forum, and we brought OICR, Atlantic Institute of Cancer Research, and Exactus, and others together, CQDM and others, in order to advocate for ways to actually encourage research in cancer in Canada. And at that point, it was countered by the proposed changes at the Patent and Medicine Price Review Board. And we advocated with government for doing more investment in research, which happened to come about nicely as well. So that became a priority. In other words, as we started to I mentioned that it's a dynamic situation. As we investigated and we deconstructed why patients weren't getting an access to certain drugs, we started to take it apart and go back all the way to the clinical trial stage and say, real-world evidence frameworks, patient preference studies, follow up with real-world evidence data, access to molecular profiling, and so on and so forth. And of course, there are many other things that came out of that, and started to identify partners around the world where we could really develop some of those initiatives, among others.
It sounds like the patient is always at the center of how you approach what needs to get done, and I think it's a great way to look at it, because it's the one continuity across the entire landscape, that the patient is always in the middle trying to figure things out and always impacted by these decisions. But it's a fresh way of taking a look at how do you start to prioritize and tackle a lot of these issues that get in the way of really treatments for patients.